The Mexican Revolution of 1910 was one of the most significant events of the 20th century. It was a social and political movement that started with the overthrow of a man who had ruled Mexico for over 30 years and became a violent struggle that consumed the lives of thousands. It encompassed many often conflicting goals, ranging from political reform to the redistribution of land for indigenous peasants. Lost beneath the shadows of Emiliano Zapata, Francisco Villa, and other of its emblematic leaders, it is common to imagine it as a distant event, but its history is deeply connected to the United States through the story of one man. Born on September 16, 1874, in a village in the southern state of Oaxaca, Ricardo Flores Magón was one of many Mexicans deeply unsatisfied with conditions in Mexico during the late 19th century. Porfirio Díaz was a former general who appeared to guide the country into the modern age. Railroads and telegraph lines increasingly winded across the nation. Torreón, which grew from a northern cotton-growing town into a city of 40,000 inhabitants, was seen by many as an example of progress. But beneath this illusion, the majority of the country suffered. These poor people, a young Flores Magón wrote of indigenous tobacco workers in his home state on October 28, 1899, suffer more than in hell itself. At night, they are locked up in a stable by key, and even then, there are night patrols to ensure they do not escape. He was deeply moved by their suffering and that of others across the country, and left for Mexico City a year later to become one of the most passionate and important critics of the government. Alongside his older brother Jesus and a close friend, Flores Magón quickly established a newspaper after arriving in the city, Regeneración, which became one of the most radical papers in the country. The national organism is infested, one of its early issues read, by parasites that call themselves public servants and drain the energy of a once vibrant people that is today miserable and degraded. He gained the admiration of other critics of the government because his newspaper published what many feared to write. But during his time in the city, the government actively tried to silence him. He was constantly harassed by police and often spent months in jail. In June 1903, the Supreme Court ruled that any piece published by Flores Magón was illegal, and he and his accomplices quickly fled to the United States. The United States offered him a limited sense of safety and the ability to raise support for his crusade against government. He moved across Laredo, San Antonio, St. Louis, and even as far as Montreal to continue publishing his newspaper. "We have always believed it is our patriotic duty," he wrote in a letter during this time, "to let those abroad know of the oppressor of our country. The persecution we suffer, by drawing the attention of the American people, has given us the opportunity to expose him." But the Mexican government continued to persecute him, and after his office in St. Louis was raided by agents that had sent to capture him, Flores Magón escaped to Los Angeles in the spring of 1907. Shortly after arriving to the western part of the city, he attempted to gain the support of the Mexican and American working classes in Los Angeles. He believed a struggle against political tyranny could help liberate them, and used his newspaper to publicize rallies and labor conferences in the city to forge alliances between Mexicans, Chicanos, and Anglo-Americans. His efforts succeeded, and Flores Magón gained political and financial support to sustain his revolutionary activities. Unbeknown to him, Thomas Furlong, an American detective hired by the Mexican government, had followed him from St. Louis and was monitoring him. The laboring classes of California and throughout the United States, he acknowledged, sympathized with these so-called revolutionists. Regardless of the support for his cause, cooperation between Mexican and American radicals greatly worried the governments of both countries, and the arrest of Flores Magón was of international importance. Shortly after 5 o'clock in the afternoon on August 23, 1907, Furlong arrested Flores Magón and his associates after breaking into their cabin. The arrest of Flores Magón illustrated the depth and importance of American support for his cause. Different labor organizations in Los Angeles and across the country raised a large sum of money for his legal defense. Elizabeth Darling Trowbridge, a wealthy Boston woman, donated to their cause and greeted him and his associates with flowers when they arrived in Arizona for their trial 1 year later. Despite their imprisonment, Flores Magón and his followers were ultimately successful. Shortly after their release, they reorganized and helped start the rebellion that resulted in the overthrow of Porfirio Díaz. From the initial sense of safety to the financial and political support they gained during their travels throughout the country, their time in the United States was important to their efforts. The Mexican Revolution was not a distant event because its trajectory passed through many American cities.